Imagine two women fighting for the same child, one fueled by love, the other by envy. To understand how it all began, we must return to the royal palace of Akoko, where two women lived under one roof, but with hearts worlds apart. But first, please support this channel by hitting the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring you more amazing stories like this one. Thank you so much. Now, let's dive into how this incredible journey began. Long ago, in the distant kingdom of Akoko, there lived a king whose wealth was legendary throughout the land. The kingdom stretched for days in every direction, with rivers that sparkled like silver ribbons and forests filled with the songs of exotic birds. His vast farms covered the landscape as far as the eye could see. The royal palace stood like a magnificent crown atop the highest hill, its walls built from the finest clay and decorated with intricate patterns that told the stories of generations past. Hundreds of servants worked the royal lands from sunrise to sunset, their songs echoing across the fields as they tended the crops that made their king the wealthiest ruler in all the neighboring kingdoms. His treasury overflowed with gold, ivory, and precious stones, collected from years of successful trade. Yet despite all his earthly riches, the king carried a heavy burden in his heart that no amount of wealth could lift. He had no children. This was not merely a personal sorrow, but a crisis that threatened the very foundation of his kingdom. Without an heir, what would happen to his people when he died? The king had married many wives over the years, each marriage filled with hope and celebration. The wedding ceremonies had been grand affairs, with drums beating from dawn to dusk, dancers filling the palace courtyards, and feasts that lasted for days. Each time the people celebrated, believing that surely this new queen would be the one to bless their king with an heir. But as the seasons turned into years and years stretched into decades, no babies came. The king consulted every doctor in the land, traveled to distant kingdoms to seek the wisdom of famous healers, and spent fortunes on herbs, potions, and ceremonies that promised to bring him children. As hope faded with each passing month, his wives began to leave him one by one. Some departed quietly in the darkness of night, taking only their personal belongings and leaving behind letters explaining their decision. Others announced their intentions boldly in the palace courtyard, declaring that they could not waste their fertile years with a man who seemed cursed never to father children. The king understood their pain, for it mirrored his own. But each departure felt like a dagger to his heart. He would stand at his palace window, watching the departing carriages disappear down the winding road, wondering if he was truly cursed by some angry spirit or forgotten god. How can a king hold his head high without children? He often wondered aloud to his most trusted counselors during their evening meetings. How can I face my ancestors when I join them, knowing that I failed to continue the royal bloodline that has ruled Akoko for centuries? His counselors, wise men with gray beards and kind eyes, tried their best to comfort their tormented king. The eldest among them, a man named Baba Agba, who had served the royal family for over 50 years, would stroke his beard thoughtfully before speaking. "Be patient, Your Majesty. The gods work in mysterious ways, and their timing is not always ours to understand. Sometimes, the most precious gifts come when we least expect them, after we have proven our worthiness through suffering and patience." These words gave the king some comfort during his darkest hours, but as more wives left and his palace grew quieter and emptier, despair often threatened to overwhelm him entirely. Soon, only 2 wives remained in the vast palace that had once echoed with the laughter and chatter of many women. These 2 could not have been more different from each other, and their contrasting natures would soon set the stage for events that would shake the kingdom to its very foundations. Adeola, the first wife, was a woman of unquestionable noble birth, a princess
born into one of the most powerful families in the region. Her father ruled a neighboring kingdom, and her mother came from a line of queens that stretched back through generations of recorded history. When she walked, she held her head high with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had never known anything but privilege and power. Her skin was smooth and unblemished, pampered with expensive oils and creams imported from distant lands. Her hair was always perfectly arranged in elaborate styles that required the work of skilled servants for hours each day. She wore clothes made from the finest silk that shimmered in the sunlight, and her jewelry, necklaces of gold and coral, bracelets that clinked musically as she moved, and rings that caught the light like captured stars, announced her status to everyone within sight. Adeola had not married the king for love, but for position and prestige. In her mind, marriage to him had been a strategic alliance between two powerful families, a way to increase her own influence and maintain her elevated status in society. She had agreed to the marriage because being the first wife of a wealthy king was better than being just another princess in her father's court. "I will not abandon my position," she declared proudly whenever anyone suggested she might follow the example of the other departed wives. "I am the first wife, and I will remain so until I bear the king's heir. When my child comes, he will be dressed in gold and silk from the moment he draws his first breath, befitting the royal blood that will flow through his veins." Because she was the senior wife and came from such an important family, the king had given Adeola control over much of the palace's daily operations. She decided who did what work, who received which privileges, and who gained access to the king's presence. She managed the servants' schedules, oversaw the preparation of meals, and handled the countless details required to keep the royal household running smoothly. This power filled her with immense pride and satisfaction, but it also revealed the darker aspects of her character. She ruled the palace with an iron fist, showing little mercy to those she considered beneath her station. She was particularly cruel to the servants who came from humble backgrounds, reminding them constantly of their lowly origins and making their lives difficult with unreasonable demands and harsh punishments for minor mistakes.
Arike, the younger wife, came from a different world. Her mother, whose name was known throughout the local markets, was a hard-working woman who sold bitter leaves, a popular vegetable used in traditional soups. Every morning before dawn, she would gather the freshest leaves from her small garden, arrange them in neat bundles, and carry them to the marketplace on her head. The bitter leaf business was not glamorous, but it was honest work that fed the family and earned them respect among their neighbors. When Arike first arrived at the palace as a young bride, her simple clothes and modest demeanor had made Adeola laugh mockingly behind her back. "What is she doing here?" Adeola had whispered to her personal servants on that first day. "How can she be called a queen? What was our husband thinking when he agreed to marry such a common girl?" But those who took the time to know Arike well saw her true beauty, not in expensive clothes or glittering jewelry, but in her kind heart and gentle spirit. She possessed a natural grace that no amount of royal training could teach. When she smiled, her whole face lit up with genuine warmth. When she spoke, her words were thoughtful and considerate. When she moved through the palace, she did so with quiet dignity that impressed everyone who encountered her. Unlike Adeola, Arike had not married the king for position or wealth. Her parents had arranged the marriage, as was customary, but she had accepted it willingly because she genuinely cared for the older man and wanted to be a good wife to him. During their brief courtship meetings, she had seen past his royal status to the lonely, troubled man beneath the crown. She had heard the pain in his voice when he spoke about his desire for children, and her compassionate heart had been moved by his suffering. He needs someone who will stand by him not for what he can give, but for who he is, she had told her mother before the wedding. He has known too many people who wanted something from him. Maybe I can be someone who simply wants to make his life happier.
Arike moved quietly through the palace each day, never demanding attention or special treatment. She helped servants with their work when she saw they were struggling, shared her food with those who had less, and offered comfort to anyone who seemed troubled. She treated the humblest kitchen worker with the same respect she showed to the most important court officials. The contrast between the two wives was clear to everyone in the palace, except the king himself. Consumed by his desperate desire for children and grateful to have any wives willing to stay with him, he was too distracted to notice the daily cruelties happening under his own roof. He saw Adeola's efficiency in managing the household and mistook it for devotion. He saw Arike's quiet nature and mistook it for contentment.
As the years passed, the king grew more desperate with each failed attempt to conceive children. He spent vast fortunes consulting with doctors and healers from every corner of the known world. Some claimed they could create magical potions that would guarantee pregnancy. Others promised that special ceremonies or pilgrimages to distant shrines would solve his problem. The king tried everything. He had the palace blessed by holy men from 7 different religions. He wore special amulets that were supposed to increase fertility. He changed his diet according to the advice of various experts. But month after month, year after year, no pregnancies occurred. The king's hair began to turn gray with worry, and lines of stress appeared on his face. His counselors watched their beloved ruler growing thinner and more haggard, his joy in life slowly fading as his hope diminished. During this difficult time, the difference between his 2 wives became even more pronounced. Adeola grew more bitter and demanding with each passing season, taking out her frustrations on the servants and making increasingly cruel comments about Arike's humble origins. Arike, meanwhile, remained patient and supportive. She could see how the lack of children was eating away at her husband's soul, and she did everything she could to comfort him without drawing attention to herself. She would sit quietly beside him during his evening meals, listening when he wanted to talk and providing peaceful companionship when he preferred silence. She never complained about her situation or made demands for special treatment. Then, like a miracle emerging from years of darkness, everything changed in a single moment.
One morning, Arike awoke with a strange sensation in her stomach. For several days, she had been feeling different, tired in a new way, sensitive to certain smells, experiencing waves of nausea that came and went without warning. At first, she dismissed these symptoms as perhaps a minor illness or something she had eaten that disagreed with her. But as they continued and even intensified, a wonderful possibility began to grow in her mind. Could it be? After all these years of waiting, was she finally carrying the child she and her husband had prayed for so fervently? She waited several more days, afraid to hope too strongly, before quietly consulting with one of the wise women who worked in the palace. This elderly servant, who had helped deliver babies for decades, examined Arike carefully and confirmed what the young woman hardly dared to believe. The old woman whispered, with tears of joy in her eyes, "You are indeed with child. After all this time, you are going to give our king the heir he has longed for." Arike felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. All the years of waiting, all the disappointment and pain would finally be rewarded. She could hardly contain her excitement, but she knew she had to be careful. Early pregnancies were fragile, and she had seen too many women lose babies in the first months to announce her condition carelessly. She decided to tell Adeola first, thinking that perhaps sharing this wonderful news with the other woman might improve their relationship. Maybe they could support each other through this special time. Maybe Adeola's hostile attitude would soften when she realized that the palace would soon be blessed with the sound of a baby's laughter. She could not have been more wrong. When Arike approached Adiola in the privacy of her older woman's chambers and quietly shared her news, she expected surprise, perhaps even happiness. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a flash of pure fury that crossed her face like lightning across a dark sky. For just the moment, the mask of royal composure slipped completely, and Arike saw the raw jealousy and hatred that Adiola had been hiding beneath her dignified exterior. It was a look so intense, so filled with malice, that Arike actually stepped backward in shock. But Adiola quickly recovered her composure, forcing her features into a semblance of concern and sisterly care. "How wonderful for you! But you must be very careful, my dear. Don't tell the king yet. You know how fragile early pregnancies can be. The first 3 months are the most dangerous time. We wouldn't want to raise his hopes after all he's been through, only to have them crushed if something goes wrong." Arike found this advice odd. Why would Adiola, who had always treated her with barely concealed contempt, suddenly show such concern for her well-being and the king's feelings? But she was too happy and too inexperienced in palace intrigue to recognize the warning signs of the trap that was being set around her. "You're right. I should wait until I'm safely past the dangerous time before telling him." "Exactly," Adiola said, with what seemed like a warm smile but never reached her eyes. "We must be very careful about such an important matter." As soon as Arike left her chambers, Adiola's false smile disappeared completely. She paced back and forth across her room like a caged leopard, her mind racing with dark thoughts and desperate plans. "That peasant girl cannot bear the king's child before me. I am the first wife, the princess, the one with royal blood. If anyone is going to give him an heir, it must be me. I will not be overshadowed by a bitter-leaf seller's daughter."
That very night, Adiola made her way through the winding streets of the town to the humble dwelling of a doctor she had consulted before, a man with a reputation for being willing to do almost anything for the right price. His small house sat in the shadows between 2 larger buildings, and few people knew of his existence unless they were desperate enough to seek out his questionable services. Dr. Adebayo was a thin man with shifty eyes and fingers that were always moving nervously, as though he were constantly calculating profit and loss. He had once been a respected healer, but years of prioritizing money over ethics had gradually transformed him into someone who operated on the wrong side of the law. He was known for selling fake medicines to desperate people, forging documents for those who needed false identities, and performing procedures that other doctors refused to attempt. When Adiola appeared at his door in the middle of the night, wrapped in a dark cloak to hide her identity, he immediately sensed the possibility of a lucrative transaction. "Your Majesty, what brings you to my humble home at such an unusual hour?" Adiola wasted no time with pleasantries. "That girl, the second wife, is pregnant," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "I cannot allow her to bear the king's child before me. You once joked about stealing a baby for me. Well, I'm not laughing now. I need your help, and I'm prepared to pay whatever you demand." The doctor's eyes lit up with greed as he immediately began calculating the potential profit from such a scheme. A desperate royal wife would pay almost anything to get what she wanted, and he had no moral qualms about helping her achieve her goals through deception. "What exactly do you have in mind?" he asked, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. "I want to pretend to be pregnant too," Adiola explained. "You'll help me fake it perfectly. Give me something to wear under my clothes that will make me look as though I'm carrying a child. Then, when her baby is born, we'll steal it and claim it's mine." The doctor leaned back in his chair, considering the complexity and risks of such a plan. It would require months of careful preparation and flawless execution, but it was certainly possible with the right resources and planning. Interesting, he mused, already working out the details in his mind. It could work, but it will be expensive and extremely dangerous. If we're caught, we'll both face execution. I'm willing to take that risk, Adiola said fiercely. And as for the cost, I have access to the royal treasury and my own family's wealth. Name your price. We'll need a specially crafted calabash bowl that we can strap to your stomach under your clothes, the doctor explained, warming to the challenge. We'll start with a small one and gradually replace it with larger versions as the months pass, perfectly mimicking the growth of a real pregnancy. But the most difficult part will be handling the birth itself. What do you mean? When she delivers, you'll need to pretend to deliver as well. We'll need fresh blood to make it real. Everyone will expect to see evidence that you've actually given birth. We'll have to steal her baby while she's recovering and present it as your own child. Audiola's eyes gleamed with determination and malice. I don't care how difficult it is. Make it happen. The doctor quoted a price that would have bankrupted most people, but Adiola agreed without hesitation. Her hatred and jealousy had consumed all rational thought, and she was willing to risk everything, her position, her life, even her soul, to prevent Arike from achieving what she saw as rightfully hers. And so began one of the most elaborate and evil deceptions ever attempted in the kingdom of Akoko.
Over the following days, the doctor worked with skilled craftsmen to create a series of increasingly large calabash bowls that could be strapped to Adeola's stomach beneath her clothing. The first one was small and barely noticeable, but each subsequent version was carefully calculated to match the expected size of a growing pregnancy at various stages. When Arike finally felt secure enough to announce her pregnancy to the king, Adeola was perfectly prepared with her own deception. The moment she heard Arike sharing the wonderful news with their husband, she immediately rushed forward with her hand pressed dramatically to her own belly. "What incredible news!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with theatrical excitement. "Actually, I have news too. I believe I'm also expecting a child." The king's reaction was everything Adeola had hoped for and more. His face lit up with a joy so profound that it seemed to transform his entire being. For a moment, he looked decades younger, as though the weight of all his years of disappointment had suddenly been lifted from his shoulders. "Two babies!" he cried out, his voice breaking with emotion. "After all these years of waiting, I'll have 2 children at once. This must be a sign that the gods have finally smiled upon our kingdom." He immediately threw himself into preparations for the arrival of his heirs with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. No expense was too great, no detail too small to receive his personal attention. He summoned the finest architects to design 2 perfect nursery rooms, each one a masterpiece of comfort and beauty. The walls were painted with scenes from happy stories, the floors covered with the softest rugs, and every piece of furniture crafted by master woodworkers. He hired teams of seamstresses to create tiny clothes fit for royal babies, gowns of silk and cotton, blankets woven with gold thread, and caps decorated with precious jewels. He imported rare foods and medicines from distant lands to ensure his wives' health during their pregnancies. He even had musicians compose lullabies specifically for his future children. "Everything must be perfect," he declared to his counselors. "These children have been so long awaited that they deserve the very best from the moment they enter the world." But as the months passed and both women appeared to progress through their pregnancies, Arike began to notice something deeply troubling about Adeola's condition. The older woman asked far too many questions about pregnancy symptoms and experiences. When did morning sickness typically begin and end? How did it feel when the baby first moved? What were the signs that delivery was approaching? It was as though Adeola was learning about pregnancy by copying everything Arike experienced rather than going through it herself. This observation filled Arike with a growing sense of unease that she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried to dismiss her suspicions.
Don't you think it's strange that we're experiencing exactly the same symptoms at exactly the same times? Asked one of the trusted servants who attended to both wives. The servant, an older woman who had helped with many pregnancies over the years, looked thoughtful and concerned. Now that you mention it, my lady, there does seem to be something unusual about the whole situation. But what could it be? Surely no one would be bold enough to fake such a thing. Arike wished she could dismiss her worries so easily, but her instincts told her that something was very wrong. She began to watch Areola more carefully, paying attention to small details that others might miss. She noticed that Areola never seemed to suffer from the exhaustion that typically plagued pregnant women. She never had food cravings or aversions. She never complained about the backaches and discomfort that Arike felt increasingly as her belly grew larger. Most telling of all, Areola's belly seemed to maintain a perfectly round, symmetrical shape that looked somehow artificial compared to the natural, irregular curve of a real pregnancy. But Arike had no proof of her suspicions, and she knew that making accusations without evidence would only make her look jealous and petty. All she could do was wait, watch, and pray that her instincts were wrong. Meanwhile, Areola's deception continued flawlessly. Each month, Dr. Adebayo would visit the palace under the pretense of monitoring her pregnancy, and during these visits, he would secretly replace her calabash bowl with a larger version. The transformation was so gradual and expertly managed that no one suspected the truth. Areola also made sure to engage in many conversations with the king about their expected babies, establishing a clear record of her pregnancy for future reference. She would discuss nursery preparations, baby names, and her hopes for the children's futures. She bought expensive baby clothes and accessories, making a great show of her maternal preparations. The king, overjoyed at the prospect of 2 heirs and grateful to both wives for staying with him through his difficulties, noticed nothing amiss. He was too busy making plans for the glorious future he envisioned with his children to pay attention to the subtle signs that might have warned him of the deception being practiced under his own roof.
When Arik went into labor one evening, as the sun was setting over the kingdom, word spread quickly through the palace like wildfire. Servants rushed through the corridors, their excited voices echoing off the stone walls as they shared the momentous news. "The queen is in labor," they called to each other. "After all these years, the royal heir is finally coming." Arike's doctor, a skilled and experienced man whom the king had personally selected from among the finest healers in the land, worked calmly and competently to ensure a safe delivery. The birthing chamber had been prepared months in advance, with everything that might be needed: clean linens, warm water, medicinal herbs, and experienced midwives to assist. As the hours passed and Arike's labor progressed, her pain was mixed with overwhelming joy. Soon she would hold in her arms the child she had dreamed of for so long. Soon she would be able to give her beloved husband the gift he had prayed for through so many years of disappointment. As the sun disappeared completely below the horizon and the palace settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Arike gave birth to a strong, healthy baby boy. His first cries filled the chamber with the most beautiful sound anyone there had ever heard: the voice of the long-awaited royal heir. "The queen has given birth to a prince!" the announcement rang through the palace corridors. "The kingdom finally has an heir!" The celebration that erupted throughout the palace was spontaneous and joyful. Servants who had worked in the royal household for decades wept with happiness. Guards who had maintained their stoic composure through years of disappointment broke into smiles and embraced each other. Even in the town below, people who heard the news began lighting fires and singing songs of celebration. But in her chambers, Adeola heard the news with a heart full of rage and desperation. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for throughout the long months of her deception. Now she had to act quickly and flawlessly. or all her planning would be for nothing. Following the plan she had rehearsed countless times in her mind, she immediately began groaning and crying out, pretending to be in labor herself. Her performance was so convincing that servants came running to her chambers, alarmed by the sounds of apparent distress. "It looks like Queen Adeola is also going into labor," they whispered excitedly to each other. "What an amazing coincidence that both queens would deliver on the same night!" Dr. Adebayo, who had been waiting nervously in a nearby room for exactly this moment, immediately appeared with a bag of medical supplies and an expression of professional concern on his face. "Don't worry," he announced to the gathered servants. "I've been monitoring Her Majesty's condition closely, and everything is proceeding normally. She doesn't want anyone else in her room during the delivery. Only me. This is a very private and sacred time for her. When the baby arrives, we'll let everyone know, and you can all offer your congratulations then." While this drama was unfolding in Adeola's chambers, Arik was being cared for in her own room by her doctor and the midwives. Following the custom of the palace and the king's specific instructions, her newborn son would be taken to his specially prepared nursery room during the night, so that his exhausted mother could rest peacefully after her ordeal. This arrangement, designed with the best intentions to ensure the comfort of both mother and child, unknowingly provided Adeola and her accomplice with the perfect opportunity to execute their wicked plan. As the palace settled into the quiet hours of deep night, when even the most dedicated servants had retired to their quarters for a few hours of rest, Adeola prepared for the most dangerous part of her deception. Dr. Adebayo had earlier slipped away from the palace under the cover of darkness, ostensibly to fetch additional medical supplies from his home, but actually to kill a goat and collect its blood in several large containers. Now he returned with his grisly cargo, moving like a shadow through the deserted corridors to Adeola's chambers. Together, they would attempt to steal Arike's baby and present him as Adeola's own child. "Remember," the doctor whispered as they made their final preparations, "you must continue making sounds as though you're in labor while I go to get the baby. If anyone asks, I'll tell them you're having a difficult delivery and need complete quiet and privacy." Adeola nodded, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Everything she had worked forward during these long months of deception would be decided in the next few hours. Either she would succeed in her plan and claim the position of honor as mother to the royal heir, or she would be exposed as a fraud and face execution for her crimes. In the nursery room, Arike's baby slept peacefully in his beautiful cradle, unaware of the danger approaching. The room was softly lit by a single oil lamp, and the tiny prince was wrapped in the finest silk blankets, looking every inch the royal heir he was born to be. Adeola crept through the dark corridors like a thief in the night, her soft slippers making no sound on the stone floors. Her heart hammered so loudly in her chest that she was certain everyone in the palace must be able to hear it, but the building remained silent around her. When she reached the nursery room, she found it empty except for the sleeping baby, exactly as she had hoped. The servants and midwives were all resting, confident that the child was safe in his secure chamber adjacent to his mother's room. "Please don't wake up," Adeola desperately whispered. "Please don't cry and give me away." The gods seemed to favor her wicked plan, for the baby remained fast asleep as she carefully lifted him from his comfortable bed. He was warm and surprisingly heavy in her arms, and for just a moment she felt a flicker of maternal instinct that almost made her reconsider her evil course. But her jealousy and ambition quickly overcame any trace of conscience. This child represented everything she had ever wanted: power, prestige, and victory over her despised rival. She could not turn back now. Carrying the sleeping infant as carefully as if he were made of the most delicate glass, Adeola made her way back through the dark corridors to her own chambers, where Dr. Adebayo waited with the goat's blood and the final stage of their deception. Working quickly and efficiently, the doctor smeared blood on Adeola's nightgown, on the bed sheets, and most importantly, all over the baby's tiny body from head to toe. The result was horrifyingly convincing. Anyone who saw them would naturally assume that Adeola had just given birth and that the blood-covered infant had just emerged from her womb. "Perfect," Dr. Adebayo declared as he surveyed their handiwork. "No one will ever suspect the truth. Now I'll announce your delivery and make sure that plenty of people see you with the baby before they have time to think too carefully about the situation." He rushed from the room and began shouting at the top of his lungs, "Adeola has given birth! She has delivered a healthy baby boy! Come quickly and congratulate Her Majesty on the arrival of her son." People came running from all directions, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, but eager to witness this historic moment. When they entered Adeola's chamber, they saw exactly what the conspirators wanted them to see. A woman covered in the evidence of recent childbirth, holding a blood-covered newborn baby in her arms. "Congratulations, Your Majesty!" they called out in unison, never suspecting for one moment that they were witnessing the result of an elaborate crime rather than a natural birth. The news of Adeola's delivery spread as quickly through the palace as Enrique's had earlier that evening. Within minutes, nearly everyone in the building had heard that both queens had given birth to sons on the same miraculous night. But one person was not celebrating with the rest.
Enrique had been awakened from her exhausted sleep by the sounds of celebration coming from other parts of the palace. At first, she was confused. Why were people making so much noise in the middle of the night? Then she heard someone mention Adeola's name and the word baby, and understanding dawned on her with a mixture of surprise and that familiar nagging unease. What an extraordinary coincidence, she thought to herself as she lay in her bed, still weak from the ordeal of childbirth. Adeola giving birth on the same night as me, just as she predicted months ago. But even as she tried to feel happy for the other woman, that persistent feeling that something was not quite right about Adeola's pregnancy came flooding back stronger than ever before. All those months of suspicious behavior, all those strange questions, all those perfectly timed symptoms, suddenly everything seemed to form a pattern that made her blood run cold. "Surely not," she whispered to herself in the darkness. Surely even Adeola wouldn't be capable of something so evil. But the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that her worst suspicions might actually be true. The timing was too perfect, too convenient, and there had been something in Adeola's eyes that first day when she announced her pregnancy, a look of triumph rather than joy, as if she had won some kind of victory rather than received a blessing. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Enrique suddenly realized that in all the excitement over Adeola's delivery, she hadn't heard her own baby cry even once since she had awakened. Babies needed to eat frequently, especially newborns, and it was unusual for an infant to sleep so quietly for so long. I should check on him, she decided, struggling to sit up despite her exhaustion and discomfort. Since I'm awake anyway, I might as well see how my little prince is doing. Supporting herself carefully against the wall, Enrique made her way slowly from her chamber to the adjoining nursery room. Her body ached from the birth, and every step required effort, but maternal instinct drove her forward. When she reached the nursery door and pushed it open, expecting to see her son sleeping peacefully in his beautiful cradle, her heart stopped. The cradle was empty. For a moment she stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what she was seeing. Then reality crashed over her like a cold wave, and she began to scream with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "My baby! Where is my baby? Someone has taken my child!" Her cries echoed through the palace corridors with such anguish that they cut through the sounds of celebration like a knife. Within seconds, servants came running from every direction, their faces filled with alarm and confusion. "What's wrong, my lady?" they asked, surrounding her as she collapsed to her knees beside the empty cradle, sobbing uncontrollably. "My baby is gone," she wailed, her voice breaking with grief and terror. "Someone has stolen my child. He was here when I went to sleep, and now he's gone." The servants tried to comfort her, offering rational explanations for what must surely be a misunderstanding. "There must be some mistake, Your Majesty," one of the older women said gently.
Perhaps one of the midwives took him for feeding or cleaning and forgot to tell you. We'll find him. He can't have gone far." But even as they spoke these reassuring words, Erike knew in her heart what had really happened. All those months of suspicion and unease had been leading to this moment. The pattern was too clear, too obvious to deny any longer. "Areola," she whispered, and then louder, "Areola has taken my baby." Before anyone could stop her, she pulled herself to her feet and ran from the nursery room with a strength that came from pure desperation. Her bare feet slapped against the cold stone floors as she raced through the corridors toward Areola's chambers. She burst through Areola's door without knocking, startling the people who had gathered there to congratulate the new mother. In the center of the room, Areola sat up in bed holding a blood-covered baby in her arms, smiling with what looked like maternal bliss. "That's my baby," Erike declared, pointing at the infant with a trembling finger. "You've stolen my child." The room fell silent, shock written on every face. Areola's expression changed from triumph to outrage in an instant. "How dare you? How dare you burst into my room like a madwoman and make such horrible accusations? Can't you see that I've just given birth? This is my son. That is my child," Erike repeated, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I don't know how you've done it, but you've stolen my baby and you're trying to pass him off as your own. You're clearly delusional from the stress of childbirth. Look at me. Look at this room. Do you see the blood on my gown, on the bed sheets? Do you see this baby covered with birth blood? How could I be holding your child when I've obviously just delivered my own?" But Erike was beyond caring about evidence or appearances. 9 months of growing suspicion had culminated in this moment of absolute certainty. She lunged forward and grabbed the baby from Areola's arms before anyone could stop her. The moment she held the infant against her chest, she knew beyond any doubt that this was her son. A mother's bond with her child is something that cannot be faked or imitated. It is written in the very fabric of creation itself. "This is my baby," she said again, more quietly, but with unshakable conviction. "I don't care what tricks you've used or what lies you've told. This is my child, and I'm taking him back."
What followed was a struggle that would be talked about in the kingdom of Akoko for generations to come. Areola, desperate to maintain her deception, fought like a wild animal to reclaim the baby she had stolen. Erike, driven by the fierce protective instinct of motherhood, held on to her son with superhuman strength despite her weakened condition. "Give him back to me," Areola shrieked, clawing at Erike's arms. "He's mine. I carried him for 9 months. I went through labor to bring him into this world." "You're a liar and a thief," Erike replied, turning her body to shield the baby from Areola's grasping hands. "You were never pregnant. I don't know how you fooled everyone, but I know the truth." The servants and courtiers who had gathered to witness what should have been a joyous occasion found themselves watching a nightmarish battle between 2 women, each claiming to be the mother of the same child. They tried to separate the combatants without harming the baby, but both women seemed possessed by forces beyond normal human emotion. "Someone must fetch the king immediately," shouted one of the counselors who had arrived on the scene. "Only His Majesty can resolve this madness." News of the fight spread through the palace faster than fire through dry grass. The king, who had been meeting with his most trusted advisors to plan celebrations for the birth of his heirs, heard the commotion and came running with his robes flying behind him. When he burst into Areola's chamber and saw his 2 wives locked in combat over a single baby, while a crowd of horrified onlookers tried to restore order, he could hardly believe his eyes. "Stop this immediately," he roared, with a voice that shook the very walls of the room. The power and authority in his command was so overwhelming that both women froze instantly, though neither released her grip on the child. The king's face was a mask of fury and disbelief as he surveyed the chaos before him. "What in the name of all the gods is happening here?" he demanded. "Have you both lost your minds, fighting over a baby like wild beasts?" "She's stolen my child, Your Majesty," Erike said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Areola was never really pregnant. She's been deceiving us all, and now she's taken my baby and claimed him as her own." "How can you make such accusations?" Areola protested, though her voice carried less conviction than before. Look at the evidence. Look at my condition. Do you see the blood on my clothes, on this bed? I've just given birth to this child. She's obviously suffered some kind of mental breakdown from her own delivery." The king looked back and forth between his two wives, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. How could such a thing be possible? How could someone fake a pregnancy for 9 months without being detected? And yet something in Enrique's manner convinced him that she truly believed what she was saying. "One of you is lying," he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of judgment. "And whoever is lying has committed a crime so serious that it can only be punished by death." He ordered one of the servants to take the baby and care for it while he decided what to do next. Then he looked at both women with the stern expression of a king who held the power of life and death in his hands. "You will both return to your chambers immediately. I will consult with my counselors and decide how to handle this matter. But I warn you both, whoever is lying will pay the ultimate price for this deception."
In the privacy of his own chambers, surrounded by his most trusted advisors, the king struggled with a problem unlike any he had ever faced. How could he determine which of his wives was telling the truth? How could he judge between two women who both claimed the same child with such passion and conviction?
"This is an impossible situation, Your Majesty," said Baba Agba, the eldest counselor. "We have no way to prove which woman actually gave birth to the child. Both show signs of having delivered. Both have blood on their clothing and bedding." "But surely there must be some way to discover the truth," the king replied, pacing back and forth across his chamber. "I cannot simply guess and risk executing an innocent woman. Yet I also cannot allow this situation to continue without resolution." The counselors debated various approaches throughout the night. Some suggested torture to force a confession. Others recommended consulting oracles or using divination to reveal the truth. Still others proposed examining both women more carefully for physical evidence of recent childbirth. But none of these methods seemed reliable enough to stake a human life upon. The king knew that if he made the wrong decision, he would have the blood of an innocent woman on his hands for the rest of his life. As dawn broke over the kingdom and the first light of morning began to filter through the palace windows, the king made a decision that showed both his wisdom and his humility. "I cannot solve this matter alone," he announced to his counselors. "The stakes are too high and the evidence too unclear. I will call together all the people of our kingdom and ask for their collective wisdom. Perhaps among so many minds, we will find a way to discover the truth." It was an unprecedented decision. Never before had a king of Akoko called upon his entire population to help resolve a personal matter. But these were unprecedented circumstances, and the king knew that the future of his kingdom might depend on getting this decision right. Messengers were sent throughout the land, calling every citizen to gather at the palace in 7 days' time. The announcement created a sensation throughout the kingdom. Everyone wanted to witness the resolution of this extraordinary case. During those 7 days of waiting, tension in the palace reached almost unbearable levels. Enrique spent most of her time in her chambers, weeping for the child who had been taken from her, and praying that justice would prevail. Areola, meanwhile, grew increasingly nervous as she realized that her elaborate deception might soon be exposed before the entire kingdom. She considered fleeing in the middle of the night, but where could she go? Her crime was so serious that no neighboring kingdom would give her sanctuary if they learned the truth. All she could do was maintain her lies and hope that somehow she could convince the people that she was the real mother. Dr. Adebayo, her partner in deception, had already disappeared as planned, taking his payment and vanishing into the vast wilderness beyond the kingdom's borders. He had no intention of being anywhere near Akoko when the truth finally came to light.
On the appointed day, people came from every corner of the kingdom to witness what everyone knew would be a historic event.
Farmers left their fields, merchants closed their shops, and even the elderly and infirm made the journey to the palace, determined not to miss this unprecedented gathering. The great courtyard of the palace, which could hold thousands of people, was packed beyond capacity. Those who couldn't fit inside climbed onto rooftops and trees, straining to hear every word of the proceedings. The air buzzed with excited conversation as people speculated about what would happen and how the truth would be revealed. When the king appeared on the raised platform that had been constructed for the occasion, a hush fell over the enormous crowd. He looked older than his years, the stress of the past week having carved new lines into his face, but his voice was strong and clear as he addressed his people. "My beloved subjects," he began, "I have called you here to help me solve a problem that threatens the very foundation of our kingdom. Both of my wives claim to be the mother of the same child. One of them is telling the truth and one is lying. The liar has committed crimes so serious that they deserve death, but I cannot determine which is which based on the evidence available to me." He then recounted the entire story: the years of childlessness, the announcements of pregnancy, the simultaneous births, and the accusation of theft that had led to this moment. The crowd listened in fascination and growing outrage as they realized the magnitude of the deception that had been attempted. "I need your wisdom," the king continued. "How can we determine which woman is the true mother of this child?" An elderly woman near the front of the crowd raised her voice above the others. She was ancient, her hair white as snow and her back bent with age. But her voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed many strange events during her long life. "Your Majesty," she called out, "in the old days, when such disputes arose over children, we used the Akoko feeding test. A baby will only accept the traditional herbs from the hand of his true mother. The bond between a mother and child cannot be broken or faked. It is written in their very souls." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many people had heard of this ancient practice, though few had ever witnessed it. It seemed like a fair and natural way to let the child himself reveal the truth. The king nodded solemnly. "Let it be done. Bring the Akoko and let both women attempt to feed the child. The one he accepts will be proven to be his mother."
A large calabash bowl filled with the traditional herb mixture was brought forward and placed on a small table in the center of the platform. The baby, who had been cared for by the palace nurses during the week of waiting, was brought out and placed in a wooden cradle where everyone could see him. The crowd fell completely silent as Adeola stepped forward to take the first test. She had volunteered to go first, hoping that her confidence would convince people of her innocence. In her heart, she still believed that months of careful deception would protect her, even now. With hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts to appear calm, she lifted the calabash and approached the baby. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath as she brought the liquid to the infant's lips. The baby turned his head away sharply, refusing to drink even a drop. The Akoko spilled onto the platform, creating dark stains on the wooden boards. But that was only the beginning of what would become one of the most extraordinary events in the history of Akoko. Suddenly, impossibly, the baby began to speak. His voice was clear and sweet, far beyond what any normal infant should have been capable of producing. But this was no ordinary child. He was the long-awaited heir who had been blessed with special powers, just as the king's counselor had once predicted. The crowd gasped and stepped backwards as the magical voice filled the air. "Calabash bowl woman, you did not give birth to me. Blood-smearing woman, you are not my mother. I am Arike's child, the bitterleaf seller's grandchild. You wore a fake belly and covered yourself with goat's blood. You are not my mother. You are not my mother."
The effect of this supernatural revelation was instantaneous and overwhelming. People fell to their knees in awe and terror. Some began to pray, others to weep. Many tried to flee from what they perceived as divine intervention, but found themselves too frightened to move. Adeola's face went white as death as she realized that her most carefully guarded secrets had just been revealed to the entire kingdom by the very child she had tried to steal. How could the baby know about the calabash bowl? How could he know about the goat's blood? There was no possible explanation except that he possessed supernatural knowledge. "It's not possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the awestruck crowd. "How could he know? How could he know?" The king, though as amazed as everyone else by this miraculous turn of events, maintained his composure long enough to call for the second part of the test. "Now let Arike try," he commanded, his voice filled with wonder and growing hope. With tears streaming down her face and her hands shaking with emotion, Arike approached her son. The moment she lifted the calabash, the baby's crying stopped, and he looked directly into her eyes with an expression of pure love and recognition. She offered him the ogbo, and he drank every single drop without hesitation, as though he had been waiting for this moment throughout the long week of separation. When he finished, he spoke again, but this time his voice was filled with joy and contentment. "Arike is my mother, the bitter leaf seller's daughter. She carried me with love for 9 long months. Calabash Bowl woman tried to steal me away, but I belong with my true mother. My mother's love is pure and true." The crowd erupted in cheers and celebration. "Arike is the mother. The baby has spoken the truth. The humble queen is the real mother."
The evidence was now undeniable. The baby himself, speaking with the voice of divine truth, had revealed the full extent of Adeola's deception. There could be no appeal from such supernatural testimony, no argument against the word of a child who clearly possessed powers beyond normal human understanding. The king's face was a mask of cold fury as he turned to face Adeola, who had collapsed to her knees in defeat and terror. "You have deceived me," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a sword. "You have stolen a child from his mother. You have made a mockery of the sacred bond between parent and child. You have turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into a nightmare of doubt and conflict." "Please, your majesty," Adeola begged, groveling at his feet. "I only wanted to give you an heir. I only wanted to make you happy." "You wanted to steal what was not yours. You wanted to build your happiness on another woman's grief. You cared nothing for the child's welfare or his mother's suffering. You thought only of your own selfish desires." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the vast assembly. "Let this be a lesson to all who would attempt such evil," he declared. "Jealousy and greed lead only to destruction. Those who try to steal what belongs to others will ultimately lose everything they have." The sentence was carried out immediately, as was the custom in those days for crimes of such magnitude. Adeola's life ended as a consequence of her own wicked choices, and the kingdom was rid of someone who had proven herself capable of the most terrible deception. This story teaches us that love cannot be faked, that parenthood cannot be stolen, and that the bond between a mother and her child is one of the most sacred forces in creation. It shows us that jealousy and greed destroy not only their targets, but those who harbor them in their hearts. Most importantly, it demonstrates that justice may sometimes be delayed, but it will never be permanently denied. What did you learn from this story? I would love to hear in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring you more amazing stories like this one. It really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.